An epic chronicle, the Drachenfels collaboration. In 1792, the French Revolution ignited a conflict that would engulf Europe for a generation. A struggle for dominance over the continent and the wider world, waged on both land and sea. Amid shifting alliances, one rivalry endured above all others: France and Britain. While Britain could not challenge France's military might on land, the seas told a different story. The Royal Navy reigned supreme over the waves, just as Napoleon would prove unmatched on the battlefield. And among Britain's many skilled naval commanders of the era, one name stood above the rest: Horatio Nelson. Bold, inspiring, and brilliant, Nelson became a national hero and a legend in British history. This is the story of his greatest battles. 1805. The war resumes. A fragile peace between Britain and France has collapsed, plunging the old adversaries into war once more. Britain, Russia, and Austria have formed a new alliance, the Third Coalition, while Napoleon, newly crowned Emperor of the French, renews France's alliance with Spain. Determined to break Britain's grip on Europe, Napoleon sets his sights on the island nation that funds the coalitions against him, cripples French overseas trade, and enforces a relentless blockade of French ports. On the Channel coast, he assembles a formidable invasion force. His seasoned troops are more than capable of overwhelming Britain, if only he can secure control of the Channel long enough to land them. The British Navy, superior in both numbers and skill, stands as the primary obstacle. However, Britain's fleet cannot be everywhere at once. Napoleon, a master of strategic concentration, intends to mass his scattered naval forces at a decisive point, overwhelming the British through sheer force of numbers. His plan calls for the French and Spanish squadrons, currently dispersed across multiple ports, to unite into a single, formidable fleet capable of challenging Britain's dominance at sea. Admiral Villeneuve takes command. The Emperor entrusts the first phase of this mission to Admiral Pierre-Charles Villeneuve. A naval officer since the age of 14, Villeneuve had fought in the American War of Independence and, as a supporter of the French Revolution, was one of the few aristocratic officers to retain his commission. Rising to the rank of Rear Admiral, he commanded the 80-gun Guillaume Tell at the Battle of the Nile in 1798, one of the few French ships to escape the disaster. Captured when Malta fell to the British, he was later released during the brief peace. In 1804, following the sudden death of the French Mediterranean Fleet's commander, Villeneuve was promoted to vice admiral. Yet in temperament, he was the antithesis of Nelson. In early 1805, he confided to the French Navy minister, "You will recall that I did not seek command of this squadron. I have always preferred a career that is practical and useful rather than one of glory." Despite his reluctance, on March 30th, 1805, following Napoleon's orders, Villeneuve sets sail from Toulon with 11 ships of the line. He successfully evades Nelson's blockade, linking up with 6 Spanish warships and an additional French vessel near Cadiz. Now commanding a fleet of 18 ships, Villeneuve embarks on a grueling 5-week transatlantic voyage. Upon reaching the French West Indies, he is joined by 2 more French ships under Rear Admiral Magan. Meanwhile, the British are left scrambling. Nelson, having lost track of Villeneuve, mistakenly believes the French are bound for Egypt and races toward Alexandria, only to realize his error. He reverses course and heads westward across the Atlantic, trailing Villeneuve by a full month. Though Nelson completes the crossing in a remarkable 4 weeks, he misses Villeneuve by mere days. The tide turns on June 8th. Villeneuve begins his return voyage to Europe. Then, fortune intervenes in Britain's favor. Nelson dispatches a fast frigate to relay intelligence back to London. By sheer chance, this ship sights Villeneuve's fleet in the Atlantic. Their heading is not toward the Mediterranean, as Nelson had assumed, but rather northward, toward the English Channel. The British respond swiftly. Vice Admiral Robert Calder, commanding 15 ships of the line, is placed on high alert. On July 22nd, off Cape Finisterre, he intercepts Villeneuve. In thick fog and chaotic fighting, the British capture 2 Spanish ships. However, Calder fails to decisively stop Villeneuve, who manages to reach the Spanish port of Ferrol. It is here that Villeneuve makes a fateful decision. His orders are explicit: continue on to Brest, and then proceed to the Channel. However, reports of enemy ships to the north convince him that the powerful British Channel Fleet is lying in wait. His fleet, already battered by storms and battle, is in no condition for another engagement. Instead of pressing forward, Villeneuve retreats to Cadiz, a move that will seal his fate. Upon receiving word of this retreat, Napoleon is incensed. Villeneuve lacks the strength of character to command even a frigate, he declares to the Minister of the Navy. By now, autumn approaches, and with it, the window for a cross-channel invasion closes. Napoleon's plans for Britain are thwarted. With no other option, he redirects his forces towards Central Europe, marching against the Austrians and Russians along the Danube. The final gambit in the meantime, Villeneuve receives new orders: sail into the Mediterranean to support French operations in Italy. Yet his fleet is in dire straits, short on supplies, undermanned, and trapped under the watchful eyes of an increasingly powerful British blockade, now under Nelson's command. Paralyzed by inaction, Villeneuve hesitates. But when word arrives that he is being replaced as commander, the sting to his pride is too much. Determined to prove himself, on October 18, 1805, he orders the Franco-Spanish fleet to set sail. His armada now consists of 33 ships of the line, 18 French and 15 Spanish. Villeneuve himself commands from the 80-gun Bucentaur. The Spanish squadron, under Admiral Gravina, is led from the mighty Príncipe de Asturias, armed with 112 guns. Nelson, ever the tactician, has been waiting. However, his fleet has been temporarily reduced. He recently dispatched 6 ships to Gibraltar for resupply and refitting. Additionally, Vice Admiral Calder, aboard HMS Prince of Wales, has been recalled to face a court-martial for his indecisive performance at Cape Finisterre. Now, Nelson faces Villeneuve's 33 warships with just 27 of his own. Yet his fleet boasts 3 immensely powerful first-rate ships: Victory, Britannia, and Vice Admiral Collingwood's Royal Sovereign. Both fleets are accompanied by a number of frigates, tasked with reconnaissance and relaying orders. On paper, the Royal Navy appears heavily outgunned, but Nelson has no intention of fighting a conventional battle. A dramatic confrontation is about to unfold, one that will shape the course of naval warfare and determine the fate of empires. The British, well aware of their numerical disadvantage, place their trust in superior seamanship and the unrivaled speed and precision of their gunnery to tip the scales in their favor. After 8 weeks anchored in Cadiz, Admiral Villeneuve finally orders his fleet to set sail. However, his captains receive little warning of their abrupt departure, and the fleet embarks under unfavorable light winds. As they make their slow progress southward along the Spanish coast, British frigates lurking offshore soon spot their movement. These swift vessels relay the news to Nelson and the British fleet patrolling 40 miles away. Without hesitation, Nelson sets a direct course to intercept. The Battle of Trafalgar begins at dawn on October 21, 1805. Villeneuve's fleet is positioned roughly 10 miles northwest of Cape Trafalgar, steering toward the Straits of Gibraltar. As the British fleet is sighted closing in from the northwest, the French admiral is faced with a critical decision: attempt to flee toward the Mediterranean or engage in battle. After brief hesitation, he makes a fateful choice. He orders his fleet to reverse course and return to Cadiz. This sudden change, combined with the light winds and the inexperience of many of his crews, throws the Franco-Spanish formation into disarray. The fleet now stretches across 5 miles of open sea in a disorganized, crescent-shaped formation, both tactically unsound and psychologically demoralizing. In stark contrast, the British fleet exudes confidence and discipline. Nelson's men are eager for battle, and he has already devised an audacious plan to secure victory. By 11 a.m., the British fleet has formed up for action, bearing down on the enemy as quickly as the gentle breeze will allow. Nelson's bold strategy, naval orthodoxy of the time, dictated that fleets should engage in parallel lines, exchanging broadsides in prolonged and often inconclusive duels. But Nelson, ever the master strategist, dismisses this conventional approach. Instead, he has chosen an aggressive and daring maneuver, attacking in two perpendicular columns, designed to punch through the enemy line, split the opposing fleet into isolated segments, and overwhelm them in close-quarters combat before the enemy vanguard can return to assist. This plan, while not unprecedented, carries significant risk. During their approach, the leading British ships will endure relentless enemy fire while being unable to return fire themselves. Unsurprisingly, Nelson himself takes the lead of one column aboard his flagship, HMS Victory, while the second is commanded by Vice Admiral Collingwood aboard HMS Royal Sovereign. As the British ships bear down on the enemy, Nelson signals to his fleet a message that will go down in history. England confides that every man will do his duty. For clarity in signaling, it is soon adjusted to the immortal phrase, England expects that every man will do his duty. The battle is joined, a stiffening wind remains elusive, and the British advance at a mere 3 knots, little more than walking speed. For an agonizing 45 minutes, Nelson's lead ships endure relentless cannon fire without the ability to return fire. The first shot rings out at noon as the French 74-gun Fougueuse fires a ranging shot toward HMS Royal Sovereign. Soon, a rolling barrage from the combined fleet follows. However, the Franco-Spanish gunners lack the discipline and precision of their British counterparts. Their lack of practice, combined with the way their ships roll broadside to the wind, results in most shots going wide of their mark. Then at last, Nelson hoists a new signal from Victory's mizzenmast: engage the enemy more closely. This order will remain flying until, later in the battle, the mast carrying it is shot away. As the range narrows, French and Spanish gunners begin to find their mark. HMS Victory and Royal Sovereign come under increasingly accurate fire. Victory's sails are riddled with holes, her spars shattered. A cannonball smashes her ship's wheel, leaving her without direct steering. Casualties mount steadily. Twice, British ships attempt to maneuver ahead of Victory to shield Nelson from the worst of the fire, but he refuses to allow it. His place, as always, is at the forefront. His objective is clear: break the enemy line directly at Villeneuve's flagship, Bucentaur, crippling the French command. However, amid the disordered enemy formation and the absence of clear identifying pennants, Nelson must guess which ship carries Villeneuve. Fortunately, he guesses correctly. At 12:30 p.m., HMS Victory is poised to pierce the enemy line just astern of Bucentaur. But it is Collingwood's HMS Royal Sovereign that strikes the first decisive blow. A devastating broadside, the British have maintained total fire discipline throughout their long approach. Their guns are double-shot, each loaded with 2 cannonballs to maximize devastation. Having absorbed fire for half an hour without responding, Royal Sovereign finally reaches the Spanish first-rate Santa Ana and unleashes a punishing broadside into her stern. The impact is catastrophic. Just minutes later, HMS Victory follows suit, passing astern of Bucentaur and delivering a shattering broadside that cripples Villeneuve's flagship, instantly killing or wounding nearly half its crew. Despite these hammer blows, the lead British ships now find themselves dangerously outnumbered. Royal Sovereign is under heavy fire from multiple directions. HMS Belial, the second ship in Collingwood's column, is completely dismasted, while HMS Mars suffers severe damage. Meanwhile, HMS Victory becomes entangled with the French Redoutable, whose deck is packed with French Marines preparing to board. In this moment of chaos, Nelson's vanguard must hold firm until reinforcements arrive. For 20 perilous minutes, the isolated British ships endure the storm. Then, one by one, additional British warships enter the fray, plunging into the heart of the disordered enemy formation. Their double-shot broadsides inflict horrific damage. Victory receives much-needed support from HMS Temeraire, while a brutal, close-quarters melee erupts across the battlefield, just as Nelson had intended. Trapped in a mass of tangled ships, the Franco-Spanish fleet is unable to maneuver or escape, caught in the merciless grip of British firepower. The final gambit, meanwhile, Admiral Dumanoir's Franco-Spanish vanguard has begun a slow, agonizing turn in an attempt to rejoin the battle. But their maneuver is sluggish and will take over an hour to complete, by which time the fate of the battle will already be sealed. Elsewhere, a lone British ship makes an audacious charge. HMS Africa, a 64-gun third-rate, had earlier become separated from the British fleet. Her captain, Henry Digby, now makes a fateful decision. He chooses to deliberately misinterpret Nelson's orders to withdraw to safety. Instead, HMS Africa sails alone past the entire enemy vanguard, exchanging broadsides with multiple enemy warships before plunging headlong into the fight against the mighty Santissima Trinidad, the Spanish behemoth of 136 guns. Meanwhile, HMS Victory and Redoutable remain locked in a brutal contest. British cannon fire rips Redoutable's hull to pieces, while French Marines prepare to storm Victory's deck. At this crucial moment, the battle is reaching its deadly crescendo. The climax of battle at this pivotal moment, HMS Temeraire emerges from the smoke, positioning herself on Redoutable's starboard side. With a devastating blast of grapeshot, she sighs through the French boarding party, cutting them down before they can storm Victory's decks. Now, locked together, Victory, Redoutable, and Temeraire drift helplessly into another French warship, Fougueuse, further entangling the chaotic melee. Some French and Spanish vessels, such as Admiral Magan's Algeciras, had used their time in port to drill their crews in the brutal arts of boarding and close-quarters combat, making them formidable adversaries in melee engagements. Yet, time and again, just as a French or Spanish warship prepares to launch a boarding assault, a British ship emerges through the haze, raking their decks with devastating volleys of grapeshot. The superior discipline and relentless firepower of the Royal Navy are methodically grinding down the enemy. One by one, the first French and Spanish ships begin striking their colors and surrender. The fatal shot at the height of the battle, a French sharpshooter perched high in the mizzenmast of Redoutable, scans the carnage below. Through the smoke, he spots the unmistakable figure of the British commander standing on Victory's quarterdeck. Lord Nelson, adorned with his distinctive medals, decorations he had stubbornly refused to remove despite the risks, presents an unmissable target. The sniper fires. A single musket ball rips through Nelson's shoulder, burrows deep into his spine, and lodges in his chest. Reeling from the impact, he collapses. "They have finally succeeded," he murmurs. "I am dead." Nelson is carried below decks for treatment, where he is kept informed of the battle's progress, his mind still fixed on the fate of his fleet. The battle's final stages by now. 3 hours have passed since the opening shots were fired. To the south, the French 74-gun Achille, battered by relentless fire, is ablaze. To the north, Admiral Dumanoir's vanguard has finally maneuvered into position, but only Intrepide makes a determined effort to engage. The rest of the French ships fire a handful of long-range shots before veering away, unwilling to commit to the desperate struggle unfolding ahead. Witnessing this perceived betrayal, one captured Spanish crew is so enraged that they offer to open fire on their supposed allies. Yet the French vanguard swiftly slips out of range. Even they can see it. The battle is lost. Villeneuve's fleet has been utterly shattered. Nelson's final moments, more than a dozen French and Spanish ships have now surrendered, while those still afloat attempt to escape the slaughter. The news reaches Nelson below decks on the Orlop of Victory. Though clinging to life, he knows his end is near. He turns to his trusted friend, Captain Hardy, and whispers his final request. "Take care of my dear Lady Hamilton, and then kiss me, Hardy." Moments later, he breathes his last. His final words, spoken with quiet satisfaction, are, "Thank God I have done my duty." The inferno of Achille as dusk approaches at the southern edge of the battlefield. The inferno aboard Achille reaches her grand magazine. The resulting explosion is cataclysmic, a detonation so powerful that it obliterates the ship and half her crew in an instant. This brutal spectacle marks the final act of a battle that has already claimed 5,000 lives. The outcome is now undeniable. Trafalgar is a decisive and crushing British victory. Of Villeneuve's 33 warships, 17 have been captured, and one has been completely destroyed. Despite several British ships suffering extensive damage, not a single one is lost. The disparity in casualties is equally staggering. The aftermath Admiral Villeneuve is among the thousands of prisoners taken by the British. He is later released and allowed to return to France, but 6 months later, he is found dead. Whether by suicide or assassination remains a mystery. His Spanish counterpart, Admiral Gravina, manages to escape the battle but succumbs to his wounds 6 months later. For the British, victory is bittersweet. They have achieved one of the greatest naval triumphs in history, but at the cost of their brilliant, irreplaceable commander. Nelson's final order before his death was for the fleet to anchor, fearing an impending storm. He was not mistaken. The tempest and the struggle for the prizes, a ferocious Atlantic storm, soon descends upon the battle site, howling for days and wreaking havoc on the battered British fleet and its many captured prizes. The violent gales scatter damaged ships across miles of ocean, creating an opening for the French and Spanish to attempt a desperate counterstrike. French frigates managed to recapture the Spanish first-rate Rayo, while 4 captured crews rise in mutiny, overpowering their British captors and seizing back their vessels. However, 3 of these ships are driven ashore and wrecked before they can make their escape. Despite immense efforts, the British are able to save only 4 of their 17 captured prizes. The rest are either lost to the storm or deliberately scuttled to prevent their recapture. In the end, the tempest claims more French and Spanish lives than the battle itself. The final blow for the French, the bad news does not end there. 2 weeks later, Admiral Dumanoir's 4 remaining ships, those that had fled the battle, are intercepted by Captain Strachan's squadron off Cape Ortegal. Outmaneuvered and outgunned, all 4 French warships are captured, completing a remarkable fortnight of British naval dominance. Nelson's body is returned to England aboard HMS Victory, preserved in a cask of brandy lashed to the mainmast. The legacy of Trafalgar in Britain. The fallen admiral is honored with a state funeral, the first non-royal to receive such a distinction since the Duke of Marlborough, 83 years earlier. His body lies in state for 3 days in the Painted Hall of Greenwich Hospital, where thousands come to pay their respects. The grand funeral procession to St. Paul's Cathedral includes 32 admirals, 189 carriages, and thousands of troops. His coffin, constructed from the timbers of the French warship Lorient, is interred in the crypt beneath the Great Dome. Meanwhile, news of Trafalgar takes 4 weeks to reach Napoleon, who is marching toward his own moment of glory at Austerlitz. Yet of the 2 great battles of 1805, Trafalgar will prove to have the greater historical consequences. Trafalgar's enduring impact, though the battle did not directly prevent an invasion of Britain, Napoleon's plans for such an endeavor had already been abandoned. The sheer scale of the victory ensured that British naval supremacy would remain unchallenged for the rest of the Napoleonic Wars. With his fleets shattered, Napoleon was forced to seek other means to undermine Britain, leading him to strategic blunders that would ultimately seal his downfall. For Britain, Trafalgar cemented an era of global dominance. The Royal Navy, now utterly unrivaled, would go on to enforce British interests around the world for the next century. Not until the Battle of Jutland in 1916 would the Royal Navy again face a challenge of similar magnitude. Trafalgar was more than just a battle, it was a turning point in history, one that reshaped the balance of power for generations to come.